Watch on the move, but actually new ones develop. And then late tonight, we've got another round expected with some big hail, some very strong winds. It was a rough night last night in Kansas here, and we've got some potential for that into western Nebraska. Now, also, got to keep an eye here into Wisconsin and Illinois, including Milwaukee to Chicago. We've got thunderstorm risk coming in today, and I do want to talk about that as well, because that's kind of first when we look at what's happening. See this little system back here across eastern Iowa? That's on the move. We've had one line of thunderstorms already come through Milwaukee, crossing over Lake Michigan right now. Got to watch this, though, because this is going to have some daytime heating out ahead of it here to destabilize the atmosphere, and that's going to make it ripe for possible storms to go severe, watching into northern Illinois and tracking potentially there into Wisconsin as well. Past couple of hours, again, we saw those storms come through Milwaukee. They're out over the lake right now. Chicago doing fine. You've had a few showers, not severe, but there will be more later today, and I think it's key that these came through so early. So now we've got plenty of time for the atmosphere to reset, refuel for potential storms. Through the afternoon hours, and especially late afternoon, we see thunderstorms developing. Not to say we're going to get a big one like this right over Naperville or near Joliet, but we have that potential for somewhere in this area to get these kind of storms. Late afternoon, rush hour home, going to be a mess there in Chicago because of all the thunderstorms, no doubt affecting us on travel on the roads and probably at the airport as well. Now, we do have a 2 on the Torcon. So when you look at the storm threats in Chicago, Des Moines, Peoria, even St. Louis, it's more likely to be damaging winds or hail, but there is a risk of tornadoes. A 2 there, a 3 back into western Nebraska, northeastern Colorado, out in the high plains. And that's where large hail is likely as well. Some of the big hail that could really do some damage to your vehicle. That area could see that 2-inch size or greater hail. We're talking golf ball, tennis ball, maybe even larger baseball size hail. It's a possibility. I mean, 'tis the season, and unfortunately everything is setting up to give us that risk. Also, some very fierce winds over 75 miles per hour or greater are possible right in this area. These storms are going to be coming in late tonight, and so make sure that you have a way to get warnings. Make sure you're not sleeping in a part of your home perhaps that a tree could fall on, because these are the kind of winds that could take out some trees, or at least some significant limbs. Let's look at the timing. Again, later this evening, we'll start to see some thunderstorms developing, but it's going to take until tonight that we see all the energy coming together, and that gives us that risk of storms. This is 11 o'clock tonight, and that risk continues through the overnight. We'll have to see how that evolves over into South Dakota and Iowa going through the overnight. Then on Tuesday, we pick it up again, Greg.
Yeah, very dynamic system.
You're probably thinking, tell me a story I haven't heard before. This has been the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe even 5 weeks now here. We've seen these repeated rounds of storms in some of the same areas. So we start tomorrow probably with a cluster of storms. We'll start through the day that we'll watch, and storms developing throughout parts of the upper Midwest as well. So those lifting up into Canada, and then the front tracks east. That's smashing east. It goes slowly, and out ahead of it, we will see an elongated area of possible severe weather, but also rain. And that's going to repeat itself in some of the same areas because, again, the front is not smashing east. We have a pretty strong high pressure in control for now, blocking it, and that's going to mean that we get multiple chances of thunderstorms, which all could bring some heavy rain. We'll be watching those southerly winds bring up the moisture, kind of setting the stage for the atmosphere to just keep reloading with more rainfall as we see that multiple storm threat evolve. Thursday's forecast, now we bring in parts of the Ohio Valley. We've got southern Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia is in that storm threat, and also back into Texas as well, where we could see severe weather back here. So we have another threat with possible thunderstorms going severe. It is May, that time of year where you expect to see these kind of storms in this area of the country, and we certainly have it. Dallas, Fort Worth, Shreveport, Little Rock, all spots that not only have been stormy lately, but have had a lot of rainfall lately. And so we do have that risk of heavy rain causing flash flooding. We'll watch from Dallas there and a corridor all the way up through central Arkansas, including around Little Rock, and extending into West Tennessee, including Memphis. Dallas, our storm threat starts on Wednesday. And look at this, Wednesday, Thursday, again on Friday, we've got the chance of thunderstorms. Then on Saturday, we finally get a break, but boy, do we start heating up, and temps are in the 90s. Humidity is still going to be up as well. You notice those overnight temperatures aren't really dropping. Rainfall could be adding up, more than 3 to 5 inches of rain in a couple of spots. Talked a lot about the southern plains up here, but also upper Midwest, there may be some pockets too of heavy rainfall through at least midweek. Molly.
And if you're among the millions of people,
actually hurricane season, it's coming up June 1st, the official start. but we know things can develop before and after.
Now, thankfully, there is no anticipated activity in the short term in the Atlantic Basin. We've already had a few areas in the East Pacific Basin to watch just a little bit. So we are rapidly approaching that time of year where we see activity start to pick up.
So we run through some of the hazards for you. We've been doing this leading up to hurricane season. We want to make sure that you're ready. It's always good to think about this before we actually get a threat. When it comes to storm surge, larger storms, hurricanes, in total size produce higher surge. Size does matter. Also, the strength of the wind matters too. Stronger wind pushes on a large area of the ocean. Of course, with a bigger storm, it makes more of a push.
Having a plan of what you're going to do will save you a lot of stress during hurricane season. Preparing ahead of time, knowing your evacuation zone, having that evacuation kit ready to go, everything, knowing where all your family members are going to meet up if you guys live in different places. All of that will make it so much easier if you find yourself in a situation where you have a hurricane that is coming towards the area that you live.
And you think probably about the track of the hurricane. The track specifically is often about that center line of the hurricane, but if the hurricane's big, the impacts are going to be well outside of the cone and outside of the track. This is actually the National Hurricane Center forecast cone for Ian, and we've got the storm surge watch on here, and you can see where the cone is, and you can see where the impacts are well outside of that cone.
And I know, you see the cone graphics a lot when we get into hurricane season, but just know that's not the entire story of what's going to happen.
Right.
And those storm surge watches and warnings, those are what you really need to pay attention to.
Exactly, and that's what we saw with Hurricane Ian. I mean, the watches, the warnings were well outside. The water rise happened. The peak of it might have been near where that center of the hurricane wasn't, just to the east of there, but there was water rise all the way down to the Florida Keys. You had flooding.
So knowing the difference between that watch and the warning, of course, is really important. And when you get to the warning, that means that life-threatening water rise is going to be anticipated within the next 36 hours. That's not a lot of time to get out and get where you need to go.
Most of the time when there's evacuations, it's because of a surge threat. Make sure that you know what your zone is and if you are in an evacuation zone when it comes time. So do that kind of homework now. For Florida, you can go to floridadisaster.org to find out if you are in an evacuation zone. Just put in your address.
Alabama, yours is readyalabama.gov. Same thing, you can put in your address and it will tell you your evacuation zone that you need to be on the lookout for when we get into tropical season.
And it might not be just on the coast. Sometimes these inland and inlet waterways can have a surge factor as well. So again, check your address. You've got Georgia is gema.georgia.gov. You can go on there and check your address just to get ready and start planning for hurricane season.
Now outside,
and there's nothing you can do about it.
No.
There's really not a lot of protection you can do against hail. I know folks in Texas have tried, right?
Yes.
They've used everything here, the big floats and anything, but it's hard to protect against hail other than getting your car inside.
Severe weather season, tornadoes tend to get a lot of attention, but we talked about hail and all the damage that can do. But what about straight line damaging winds? That's been a big theme as of late.
You and I were just talking about how many of these kinds of events we've had.
Back to back.
Tallahassee, Houston. Now look at this in Salina, Kansas. We had a nasty bow echo that came through here with winds of 100 miles per hour.
And that will do some damage very quickly to a lot of areas. You can see all of the wind reports and the damage reports we had out of that. Now, as we're starting off Monday, we are kicking off another week of severe weather almost every single day this week.
Yes. Now, there'll be a couple of zones today. Got to watch Milwaukee to Chicago, and I know you had some storms this morning. Those are not the ones we're worried about. It comes later. But then tonight, we could see some of those really strong winds, big hail, and tornado possible into western Nebraska.
So here's what we have this morning. Now, a lot of the strongest storms have moved through Wisconsin at this point. We have a few leftover storms in the Iowa area. They have quite a bit of lightning, but these are slowly starting to taper off. What they're doing, though, is they're laying down some boundaries that will then provide some lift for storms later this evening.
And we have the same complex that's right now bringing rain to Iowa is going to be on the move, giving us the risk of those thunderstorms here later this afternoon, early evening, the commute home, Chicago. Be ready. It could really, this weather could add some extra time to it.
It certainly could. And driving in the rain is stressful. Driving in severe weather is even more stressful when you're trying to navigate roads in rush hour time frame. But here we go, Chicago. After what was a picture-perfect weekend, you were under the threat for severe weather. All hazards are in play, including tornadoes, but the highest tornado risk is going to be back towards the high plains and parts of the northern plains.
Yeah, that's where we have a 3. Now, we also are going to watch for another threat for severe weather again tomorrow. And, Greg, the whole boundary kind of stretches out more by tomorrow.
It does, and the system over.
Listen, I'm sure it's a mix of relief and frustration as some homes have had their power restored, but we know many others are still waiting, Justin.
Yeah, Jen, there was a gentleman in our hotel this morning.
Justin, are there any traffic lights that are still blinking, or has those all been restored?
No, it depends on where you go.
Highways and the skyways.
Busy weekend coming up, and I know
goodness,
it's already been busy at the airports here. Just wait till this weekend.
They're predicting a record number of travelers. So if you have travel plans at the airport, make sure you're giving yourself plenty of time. But also if you're traveling by car, maybe start thinking about those rush hour time frames and how to avoid those.
We're going to show you some of the times to avoid, actually, when it comes to travel. Interesting how much train, bus, and cruise is up by more than 5.6%.
I've heard cruise travel has exploded recently as far as how many people are booking cruise travel. So, you know, if you are interested in that, maybe you might want to look at it sooner than later.
Well, here's a look at the forecast, too. That makes a big difference, right? Your Friday forecast, well, rain to contend with across the eastern half of the country on all the interstates. Now, Florida still looks dry, but hot. You need good working AC in your car if you're driving to Florida.
Friday, here are some of the airports that could be impacted as we start off the holiday weekend. If you're traveling on Friday, you might want to have a lot of patience, have a plan, a book, maybe a good book at the airport if you find a delay.
Now, AAA expects the worst travel day for the Atlanta area to actually be Saturday, with the timing being in the afternoon, about 4:45. Traffic volume expected to be more than 50% than usual.
You combine that with the fact that we're likely going to see some rain in the southeast on Saturday as people are trying to travel. It's really the eastern half almost of the country that embedded in some rain and thunderstorms just as people are trying to get to those holiday destinations.
I know. All right. So we'll keep watching the weather for you. And if you're heading to the beach, we've got to look at that forecast too. So you can. Well, thanks for getting your day going with us as we help you plan for the big events in your neighborhood.
And the Weather Channel, of course, has you covered from coast to coast as a new round of severe weather threat arrives not just today, but also tomorrow in parts of the Midwest.
You really don't have time to catch your breath because every single week the atmosphere is reloading. So storms start today, but that rolls all the way through the late week. Behind us, you can see every single day has a new threat. Many of the areas repeating threats.
Right. That's, I think, part of the challenge is you get multiple chances. It gets very stressful day after day to have to be dealing with this storm risk.
Yeah, you get storm fatigue and say your area doesn't get hit, but you have another risk the next day. You're like, okay, maybe I might be okay this time. It's never safe to assume that.
Right. And, you know, we're going to be dealing with the rain threat, too, considering all these spots get inundated day after day. So, and more flooding concerns.
Well, cities from the Great Lakes to the deep south.
Going on for you today in the forecast. So thunderstorms could be severe. Milwaukee, Chicago, and you might be thinking, I already got some storms this morning. Those were not the severe ones. They actually come later on this afternoon. I'll track that. We've got another red zone that extends back in through parts of Nebraska. Likely actually severe weather there extending into Colorado. And so I'll look at that as well. You know, first up these thunderstorms that came through Milwaukee earlier, now over Lake Michigan. We'll see them keep on moving and bringing lightning as a threat. Certainly boaters. You guys are not out there this morning. But watching this part of the disturbance over eastern Iowa right now, bringing some rain showers. That's going to be on the move. And all the while, we've got time for the atmosphere to rebuild, refuel. Already seeing some of the instability building. Chicago, you had none early this morning, and getting some of those lower levels of instability back into the area. That's the juice. That's the energy for the thunderstorms to tap into, and we'll see that actually growing through the day. Right now, we have a couple of thunderstorms out there in Wisconsin, maybe around Dodgeville, heading towards Madison. Just one or two. Again, it's not severe, but it does have lightning with it, and these showers didn't before. They're just starting to get some lightning, and that's telling to us, showing us that the atmosphere is getting that instability and tapping into it. Chicago, quiet for now, but not the case later today. We've got thunderstorms coming in. Oh, timing is terrible. It comes in about your commute time. So this is 4 o'clock and showers start to build. Thunderstorms will be popping. And let me tell you, every time I show this high resolution forecast radar, it is going to be different. That is the nature of this kind of forecasting. So it's nearly impossible to predict exactly where a thunderstorm is going to be at a given time with that kind of setup. But we know this is the general timing, and that's really what that allows you to get out of that. 2 on the Torcon. Hail and wind are probably the bigger threats, but still the isolated tornado risk. And we have a 3 back into western Nebraska. This is a zone that will see all the hazards in a bigger way. The tornado risk, we've got that risk of big hail, like 2-inch size hail or greater, golf ball, tennis ball size hail, maybe even larger, and some fierce winds, a possibility as well, perhaps more than 75 miles per hour. I want to quickly show you this timing just because it's later, so you need to make sure you have a way to get warnings that will wake you up before you go to bed tonight, because it may be after that these storms really fire up here. As you saw at the beginning of the show, the threat continues into Tuesday, Greg.
Yeah, it does. And it's going to
Wettest on record across the South. It's just been a stormy stretch, especially over the past several weeks. So let's look at what's coming our way as we get through midweek. You know, Greg was talking about the storms tomorrow and the threat that we have for severe weather up here. Watch what happens as the front makes a move out ahead of it, thunderstorms, but it kind of gets stuck right here for a few days. And I don't say it's going to be in the exact same position, but we're going to see multiple storm chances in and around the same vicinity. Dallas, Little Rock, Paducah, Louisville all have thunderstorms in your forecast on Wednesday, and especially here from Arkansas back into Oklahoma, maybe up into Missouri. This is where we have the most amount of moisture, the most likely chance of training thunderstorms or repeated rounds of storms. That will lead to that risk of flash flooding. Thursday's forecast, we're not going far. Some of the same spots, including in central Arkansas. In fact, a lot of the state of Arkansas, central and eastern Oklahoma, back into northern Texas. The threat for flash flooding. You can see that risk area right here. Looks a lot like the day before, doesn't it? But this is Thursday into Friday morning. Still watching heavy rainfall. Dallas, your forecast this week, good at the start of the week, but we are looking at Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all with storm chances, bringing all the hazards, severe weather, and also that risk for heavy rainfall. Then when we do dry out, we heat up. And when I say dry out, we just stop raining. We're not going to dry out. It's going to be very humid actually out there. Rainfall amounts could be more than 3 to 5 inches of rain here, especially into parts of the lower Mississippi Valley, Molly.
And if you are among
which officially starts June the 1st, we want to make sure that you are ready. And look, storms can develop, hurricanes and tropical storms can develop before the official start. So
June 1st is just the start that we put out there.
On average, that's when, yes.
Mother Nature can do whatever she wants and has in years past. However, in the short term, there's not a lot of activity that's anticipated. So maybe we get to June 1st this year before we actually see anything.
It gives you time to get ready.
Right.
It's a good time to do that without anything threatening. So today we want to talk about storm surge and how it relates to storm size. So larger hurricanes will produce more storm surge. They've got more mass, right? More size to be pushing that water towards shore. And when you have stronger winds and that large size, you get that even greater storm surge.
So preparing for storm surge, all important, and knowing that you can have storm surge outside of the forecast cone. We're going to talk about that in a second. But a lot of times when you have an evacuation, a mandatory evacuation, it's because of the surge. So knowing that evacuation zone, having your bags ready to go so that when you get that evacuation notice, you can just get out the door.
You know, these are a lot of things to consider. What if there are special needs when you need to decide on a shelter? Do you have pets? It's a good time to think about it when there's not a threat, because then it gets frantic in the moment, you know?
It gets frantic, it gets stressful, you're getting a lot of information at once. So having at least a couple things already ready to go is going to save you a lot of stress.
Now, when it comes to surge, it's well outside of that center line of where the storm is tracking. The cone itself is actually for the forecast of the center line of the storm track. And we know that the impacts extend well outside of the cone. The cone has nothing to do with how big the storm is.
And this was the storm surge watch with Hurricane Ian. And you see the cone, how far outside of the cone those watches extend, all the way down to the Keys.
Yeah, even as the cone shifted, you see those storm surge risks here continue to be well outside of that cone of uncertainty. And we saw the water rise all the way down through the Florida Keys, moving up nearly 2.5 feet in spots, inundating some areas. The worst of it was near the center of the storm, to the right of it, but you still have impacts well away.
And we know a number of deaths from Hurricane Ian actually were caused by the surge. And that is unfortunately the case when it comes to strong hurricanes like Ian. It is always about the surge. So knowing the difference between a watch and a warning when it comes to the surge watches and warnings, 36 hours is all you have when you get that warning. So at that point, you need to either already be gone or thinking about getting out of there very quickly.
Paying attention to what your local emergency management officials say. And a way that you can find out here if you are in evacuation zone is to look it up ahead of time and put your address in, because it's very specific actually to addresses. Florida, you go to floridadisaster.org. This is a good time to do it before we have any storms threatening.
Alabama, yours is readyalabama.gov. Georgia, which by the way is well overdue for a hurricane on the Georgia coastline. Yours is gma.georgia.gov.
And don't forget, it's not just on the coast. Sometimes the inland waterways are affected by surge, so make sure you check your address.
Well, from shorelines to city parks, tracks
windstorms. Both of them bow echoes, that backward-shaped C, both putting out their own damaging winds.
Right,
and then
separately.
They came together.
And I was working with Mark Elliott yesterday, and he was talking about how basically the atmosphere had the ability to produce these upper echelon winds.
And they did.
But it just needed to come together just right. And it did, unfortunately, for many of these areas across Kansas. Started around Dodge City. It started just west of Salina. And look at all of the wind reports you had in the wake of this.
90, 100-mile-per-hour winds. I mean, that's intense here. That will do significant damage. You think about tornadoes all the time as being the most damaging. This is very damaging. These winds are, at the same level as tornado winds.
Absolutely. And it's one of those dangers that people don't really pay as much attention to because tornadoes tend to get all of the attention as well as hail. But straight line damaging winds can be extremely dangerous. And we're going to have another wind threat today. But all hazards are in play from areas like the High Plains over across South Dakota right into the Midwest, Chicago, which had a beautiful weekend. Now things are changing.
We had one little shower move through earlier Chicago. Now we're in a break, and that's kind of bad to be in a break this time of day because the sun is getting through. We're getting that instability building, and then when this thing gets over into Chicago, that disturbance is going to help trigger thunderstorms right around rush hour.
And that's the other thing. The timing of this is going to be pretty unfortunate. Here's a few of the showers that we have out there right now. Madison just got a pretty good thunderstorm. We go down to the Chicago area. That's the break that Jen was just talking about. But this is allowing the atmosphere to reload.
Yep.
We're going to see plenty of instability build in, and just in time for when you're getting ready to head home from work. Maybe the kids are getting in those last couple of school activities. Boom, we're going to see thunderstorms.
Now, we do have a risk of tornadoes. It's a 2 all across the Midwest, which is not 0, so you still have that risk. Make sure you're ready for warnings. It's a 3 over here into western Nebraska, into the high plains of Colorado out there. And this is an area that will have all the hazards, including really big hail. 2-inch size or greater, golf ball size, tennis ball, even baseball size hail.
And potentially hail that's being blown around by the wind, making the damage even worse from the hail. But we know, Dr. Postell, it is not just today. This is kicking off what's going to be
is live in Houston. And Justin, we know it's a mix of relief and frustration because some homes have power restored, but many others are still waiting.
That's right. In fact, last check,
the highways and the skyways.
We're heading to Memorial Day weekend and people are traveling. The numbers are up again this year. We've got 38.4 million vehicles, 3.51 million by plane, and 1.9 million by train, bus, or cruise.
And that number kind of surprises me. But what doesn't surprise me is the fact that people are ready to travel. They're ready to go on their summer vacations. They're ready to get that beach season going.
Doesn't it feel like it's crept up on us this year? All of a sudden, it's Memorial Day. Where did this year go?
I think, too, a lot of it is the temperatures where we went right from like a nice cooler pattern to, whoa, it's summertime.
It is hot. And that's going to be the case in Florida. It stays hot this week. This is your Friday forecast. We've got a lot of rain and storms out there smattered across parts of the east. That'll be affecting travel, and not just on the roads, but also at the airports.
Give yourself lots of extra time to get through security with all the extra people that are going to be there, but also the delays that we might have to see.
And just the drive to the airport actually could be a little slow if you've got rain. Atlanta, your worst travel day actually expected to be on Saturday based on AAA estimates. Worst travel time into the evening. It's going to, what they say, about 50% more than typical.
Complicated by the fact that we'll have rain and thunderstorms too, which if you've ever driven through Atlanta with rain and thunderstorms, just know it's going to take you a lot of extra time.
If your destination is the beach, we've got to look at that forecast ahead. And it has been weeks like this over the past, now I think we're tallying 6 weeks of this kind of active weather. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for getting your day going with us as we help you plan for the big events in your neighborhood.
Of course, the Weather Channel has you covered from coast to coast as this new set of severe weather begins to take shape, and it's going to be with us for a couple of days.
These storms start today. Really, they started yesterday, and they roll right into the late week. Almost every single day is going to feature a threat. And like you said, it's been weeks of this. So I think even if you're not ready for the summer heat, getting that pattern where all we have to deal with is the heat, that might be welcome at this point.
I know. So often we get into these waves of weather where you maybe get 3 days of active weather, but then you get a few days off, and then it comes back again. But I feel like it's been nonstop.
And it's changed position, right? Because remember, for the last couple of days, last week, we've been dealing with a lot of severe weather along the Gulf Coast. Now we're back to the plains where we were maybe a month ago, where the plains seem to be in the Midwest, the highlight of the severe weather.
Yeah.
Well, it's cities from the Great Lakes to the deeps.
This morning have been starting to increase in coverage. I'll show you that in a moment into Wisconsin. We have the risk of thunderstorms in southern Wisconsin and into Illinois, including Chicago. So I'll show you how the timing of that is going to work. And then also we've got more active weather with some bigger storms back into western Nebraska, northeastern Colorado. We had one batch roll through this morning. Milwaukee, you've already had your thunderstorms for today, but there's more to come. Those now are over, moving into lower Michigan, just north of Ludington. We also have a few thunderstorms here. This is out ahead of our upper level low. That little piece of energy, the way it looks on the radar and the way it looks on the satellite, is actually going to be causing, I think, more of an explosion of storms as we get into the next couple of hours, simply because the air is getting more unstable. We can see this background color. Now there were yellows, now there's oranges and reds starting to work in here. That's some higher levels of available energy in the atmosphere, and it's building, as it often does during the day when there's the daytime heating in May and that sun angle is strong. So now, as we get our system to move in here, it's going to tap into more energy and bring us at risk for severe weather. Madison, you've had one thunderstorm go through earlier, another one just off to your north and west. You're probably hearing some rumbles of thunder in Madison, but you'll probably miss that one. Chicago doing fine for now. That's not going to last. Actually, Rockford, look at that. We'll be getting storms soon. We've got a chance of thunderstorms on the increase in coverage through the late afternoon and early evening. Chicago watching for that as we get through the day today. Naperville, we could get big storms. Joliet, Chicago, Des Plaines, Waukegan, getting up here into Wilmette. All are going to see that chance. Not to say everyone's going to get a severe thunderstorm, but all have the chance of getting into potentially severe thunderstorms. And lightning will be a risk out there for any of those late afternoon outside activities. 2 on the Torcon across this whole zone. There's a 3 back into western Nebraska, northeastern Colorado. That happens to also be the area where we've got the threat for some larger hail, 2-inch in size or greater, golf ball, tennis ball, maybe even larger hail, and really strong winds again, 75-mile-per-hour winds or greater. So all the threats coming in at night. Let me show you the timing on this one. A few thunderstorms this evening start. This is about 7 or 8 o'clock. But really, once we get into 11, 12, 1 a.m., that's going to be a more extensive coverage of storms moving through Nebraska. Omaha, you might be woken up a little early tomorrow morning because of thunderstorms coming in here. And then what does this mean for your Tuesday forecast, Greg?
Well, I think, Jen, you're exactly right.
We start with the risk of thunderstorms that will be on the move on your Tuesday. This is going to be up into Minnesota, all the way through Wisconsin. Eventually, these storms will be on the move. We'll keep an eye all the way down through Kansas City and St. Louis. And then we'll see the front move, but not that far. Still have a pretty strong high pressure over here blocking things from coming through. By the way, it's why you're going to be so warm the next couple days in Nashville, but the front's on your doorstep. We'll get ready for that end of the week. By midweek, it's sitting here in Arkansas, back in Oklahoma, in Texas, and it is going to be giving us the risk of thunderstorms, going severe, heavy rainfall, another concern as well, especially eastern Oklahoma, good chunk of northwestern Arkansas and central Arkansas, southwestern Missouri, even extending into Illinois. It's possible to see flash flooding. Again, there'll be multiple chances of storms, but also just a lot of moisture showing up in the atmosphere. So if there's something to make it rain, it will rain pretty heavily time and time again. Thursday's forecast is for possible thunderstorms, watching areas in eastern and central Oklahoma, Arkansas, yet again, Little Rock, you show up on this Thursday forecast too, and Dallas also. By Thursday, we will watch for storms. So now we got 2 days in a row of the risk of rainfall. That may play a role in leading to the risk of flooding or flash flooding. If the ground's saturated and you get more heavy rainfall, that could lead to problems. Dallas, it's Wednesday, it's Thursday, and Friday with a chance of storms. Saturday, we get a break. Not that it really dries out because it's going to be really sticky and humid, but we won't be getting storm chances. It'll be hot and humid. 93 degrees, it feels like, is going to be up there as well. Then we look at how much rainfall could happen. 2 to 3 inches of rain, very widespread in 2 pockets, upper Midwest and into parts of the South. But 3 to 5 inches of rain, certainly a possibility, and especially looking hard at Arkansas with that risk. Now, if you are among June the 1st is the start of the season, we know things can happen earlier or it can happen later too. But this is a good time to think about preparations. Today's topic is storm surge.
And while there's not anything out there that's threatening, this is the time you can think about, okay, storm surge, what makes it so bad? How can I be prepared for it? And when we talk about storm surge, one of the factors is the size of the storm and the amount of wind that we have, the strength of the wind, because you have a large storm that has very strong winds that's pushing all of that water on shore with it.
Yeah, and when you have the strong winds, especially when they're slow moving, like all of it just helps pile up the water. The seafloor, or the bathymetry, which is one of my favorite words, which is what basically the shape of the seafloor is like, also makes a difference too. So what you need to do is be prepared no matter what kind of storm is coming your way, so you're ready for everything.
And these are some great tips to think about about, how am I going to prepare for this? All the different aspects of your life. Do I have some members of my family that have special needs, that might have special considerations when evacuating? Do you have pets? Where are you going to take them? Are you going to have supplies for them? And also just your basic needs and some of those important documents, having cash, which not a lot of people have these days.
I know. I'm always running out of cash. And so let's look at, I want to show you an example of why it's so important to pay attention to the watches and warnings and not go cone crazy when it comes to the cone of uncertainty. This is from Hurricane Ian, and you can see where that cone is, but also how the storm surge watches extend well outside of the cone.
I know that you'll probably get tired of hearing us say this, but it's always worth saying again that the forecast cone tracks the center of the storm.
Right.
Not the size of the storm, which is a common misconception, and I get. But there is a lot of impacts that are outside of that forecast cone, storm surge being one of the biggest.
So you want to continue to pay attention to not just where it's making landfall, but did you see those storm surge warnings that were on
outside
the northeast coast of Florida? All depends on how the wind flow is affecting the water and pushing in the area, and there'll be impacts. The peak of the storm surge is going to be closest to where we see that landfall, just to the east of there, but you will have impactful surge potentially far away from where we have landfall.
And it's definitely worth thinking about, not every storm is the same. So maybe you were in Hurricane Ian and your particular area didn't get storm surge. That doesn't mean the next storm that comes in a very similar way is not going to impact you.
So pay attention to your watches and warning. A storm surge watch is issued when storm surge could be threatening in 48 hours, a warning within 36 hours. And you need to go ahead and check on your evacuation zone. This is what we're doing right now, is just being prepared. This is not going to tell you whether or not to evacuate. This is just know what zone you're in should you get to a point where they start to issue evacuations.
And these are the websites like Alabama, readyalabama.gov that you can put in your address and figure out where your evacuation zone is. And from the shoreline